Hello, everybody. Welcome back. We've got about 2 minutes, and then we'll get our meeting for Friday, the 18th, started. Welcome to you guys. I hope you're doing really good. So I'll just be with you guys in a few minutes, but feel free to say hello or good morning or anything else in the chat. And yeah, get comfortable. We'll be right at it in a minute. Good morning. Hey there, Ivan. Existence is not a predicate. It's similar to what existence Oh, hey there. Oh, no, not to worry. I didn't actually see it. You retracted those, but it's all good. Not to worry, Chloe. Hi there. Good morning, Jade. Good to see you, too. Good morning, Parker and Rachel. Good to see everybody. Hope you're having a good week. Just get in this one more meeting for philosophy of religion this week, and then go on to our weekend. Air quality is a little bit better, at least where I'm at, over here in Long Beach, so that's nice. Yeah, I think I said to you guys I'm a big runner, so it's been kind of tough not being able to get out there for the first part of this week, but now that the air's clear, I'm looking forward to getting in some good exercise next few days. All right, guys, so it's 10. Good morning, welcome back. Good to see you guys. So let's just get back into it. We are going to try and go over some more of the material on philosophy of religion, and we're going to try to wrap this up today or Monday at the latest, if possible. And then you'll be able to have all the material you need for the upcoming paper that's due not next week, but the following week. Okay, so let's see. I remember that we had finished talking Pascal's wager, isn't that right, on Wednesday? Let me know in the chat. Hey, Vlad. Pascal's wager, right? The whole, hey there, Davis. It's better to believe in God because it poses less risk and holds the potential for more reward. Isn't that right? Yes. Okay, good, Parker. Just trying to get ourselves set. So we're going to move on from Pascal, and we're going to start talking about some of the possible critics of Pascal's wager. Now, there's at least two critical arguments that we're going to present that can be used as objections to him. And anybody who is thinking of working on the first prompt would want to know about those objections because, as you guys know, it says give two objections to each argument. One argument is the ontological argument. You give two objections to it. The other one, Pascal's wager. But we haven't yet heard about these objections yet, so now we're going to try and discuss those. So the first piece for today, then, is written by this author named W.K. Clifford. Okay, and it's called The Ethics of Belief. W.K. Clifford, he lived in the 1800s, in the 19th century, and he had a short but important, influential life. I'm trying to get to the page here. He lived from 1845 to 1879. And he wrote this essay in 1877, so that's the publication date there. So just as I sometimes like to set the stage, I'm giving you basic info here that, is easy enough. This is the author's name, title of the current paper, the publication date, and then his life date. So even though he had a short life, he made outstanding contributions in a couple of different fields, mathematics, philosophy. He was made a fellow of the British Royal Society at the age of 29, for his work in mathematics. So he's a pretty well-distinguished intellectual during his short life, and we're looking at a classic paper of his that's become well known called The Ethics of Belief. Ethics has to do with what's right and wrong, what's good and bad, what's moral and immoral. And we're going to talk about ethics a lot. That's our next subject of the class starting next week. But for now anyway, the title just has to do with the idea that there's something moral or immoral about the way we form our beliefs. So this article is trying to describe what's the wrong, unethical way that some people go about their business when they form their beliefs, and why we shouldn't do that and what's wrong with it. So to get the whole discussion of his paper started, I want to try and walk you guys through a hypothetical scenario that he provides to explain his thinking. Now, as I've said, and you guys have read many articles now in this class, there's a lot of hypothetical scenarios that are used by philosophers to try and focus the reader's mind on a core set of concepts to make an argument. So here we have yet another example of something like that, and it's the example of the ship owner. Okay, so ship owner example. So the best way for me to describe this whole scenario is to just kind of talk you through it, like I'm telling you the story, as it were. But for a visual, here you go. This is the ship owner, and he owns this ship here. But the thing about his ship that he owns is that it's not a very well built ship, and it's actually starting to fall apart. So it's got all kinds of problems. Here's a crack that's leaking, and there's a bent mast, other cracks and loose floorboards. So basically, it's like a really, really decrepit ship that is likely to just sink if it's ever allowed to sail out of the harbor. Now here is the ship owner himself, and he knows better than anybody how dangerous this ship is to actually sail, and how likely it is to just fall apart if it goes anywhere, because it's literally on its last legs. And he's totally aware of that. I mean, say someone owns a car, the car owner knows probably better than anybody else what its current condition is. And since he's a ship owner, he of all people is the most well informed about how badly the ship is damaged. Okay, so it's no surprise to him. He's totally clear and fully aware that this ship should not sail and that it's dangerous, and it's very well likely that it would sink if it did. But okay, he also kind of wants to let it sail one more time. He hopes and wishes that if he does, that it will just all somehow work out, okay? Now, he doesn't have very good reasons to believe that, because the evidence is clear and he's totally well aware of it, that the ship is unsafe. But he wants to believe that it'll work out, because maybe if that last journey is successful, he'll make some kind of profit off of it. So what he does is he works himself up to convince himself that, you know what, it's gone on so many other trips, it can make just one more. I think it will. I hope and I wish that it will, so I'm going to go on and just believe that it will. Okay? So he then, based on that hope and wishful thinking, forms the belief that it'll work out, and he decides based on that to take the action of letting the ship sail. Now, in the scenario, there's like two alternative endings. Kind of like, you know, like in some films and stuff, if you get the DVD version or whatever, you can watch like alternate endings. So there's two different possible ways this can play out, and let me give you version one. So, you know, he's got his damaged, busted ship, and he knows that it's not safe, but he convinces himself it'll be okay one more time. Now imagine in one scenario that he did that, and then the ship actually did sink, okay, and all the crew and all the cargo is just totally lost. So a lot of death and destruction. Sinks after he lets it sail. In our scenario that we gave, would that be something that's wrong, that he should be, that we could say he's blameworthy for that? Would you say so or no? Like, because it sank. Did he do something that is wrong? Yeah, okay, good. Ivan, Parker, that's the right kind of response. But let's just open that up a bit. Why is it a fair thing to say he deserves blame? Why does he deserve some blame? Or maybe all the blame? Why? He knew it was in bad condition. That's the reason, exactly. So it's not like this disaster of the, you know, capsized ship with all the people on it dying is something that strikes him as a complete out of nowhere surprise. Like, what? How did that happen? No way. This ship should never. That's not something he can claim, because he knew full well that this was probably going to happen if the ship was allowed to sail. It's not like the Titanic where everyone was shocked because they thought it was like impervious to accident. So therefore, in the scenario where the ship sinks, clearly he did something wrong. He's directly responsible for the loss of life and loss of property. But let's try a different version of our case and see what you think. Version 2, it's the same as the beginning, where there's a guy, he owns the ship, he knows it's very well damaged, and that it probably will sink. And in the same way, he comes up to believe that it'll work out if he just allows it to go one more time, because that's what he really hopes for. Now in version 2, though, let's imagine that he made that decision and he let it sail out, but somehow just good luck worked out in his favor, and it actually did make it back safely to the harbor and returned without any problem. Now, if that is how it worked out, do you think he still did do something wrong, though, by letting it sail? Was it still wrong even when there's no disaster that causes the boat to sink? Okay, Ivan, Parker, thank you for your contribution. Jess, yes. Chloe, okay, good. That's the consensus, and that's what the author argues. But let's try and explain why. Because some people might say no harm, no foul, nothing happened, so what's the problem? But let's try and get into the mind frame of saying it was wrong. Why would it still be wrong? Okay, Ivan, because he put a wager on the people's safety. Exactly. The way I would say it is that he took unnecessary risks with people's life, knowing full well that it might not have worked out very well and that it could have led to their death. So even if it happens to just work out favorably, like, good luck, good fortune shines down on him and no harm came to anybody, that doesn't excuse the moral blame that he does deserve for just making the decision without having good evidence that it will work out. Okay? So the point the author makes here is that the action of allowing the ship to sail was wrong even before we find out whether it sinks or not. It was wrong in the first place because whether it turns out to work out well or not, it was based on the same evidence that the ship was likely to sink. If it works out favorably, obviously we know he did something wrong because we're seeing the bad consequences. But if there are no bad consequences that come from it, he just kind of got lucky, and it's like we didn't find out that he did something wrong. But still, it was wrong for him to have done it. Let me give you a more modern example, because this is from 1877, so obviously it's not the time yet of like automobiles. But in the modern day, we might use that as a different example. Say there's someone way too drunk to drive, and they know it. Like they know they're too drunk. You can give them a breathalyzer, and they blow into it, and like at a party, and they see, oh, this is like 0.2. I'm way over the limit. I'm slurring my speech. I'm having a hard time walking in a straight line. So they're thinking these thoughts. The evidence shows I'm probably not good to drive. But suppose that this person is like the ship owner, and they're saying to themselves, well, I know that's what the evidence is, but I just believe in myself, and I believe I can make it work out, and I think maybe I'll just get lucky, and it's just one drive, so I think I'll make it. Okay? So they decide to get behind the wheel. Now, is that wrong, or is that okay? I hope you can agree that's wrong. It's a little more of a relatable example, right? Because we don't roll around in boats for the most part. So that would be wrong. And it would be wrong, obviously, if he hit people and killed them. But of course, it would also be wrong, right, if he happened to get lucky and didn't hit anybody and got home safely, which is possible, even when one is drunk. But that doesn't mean that it's something that excuses the blameworthiness, because he still put people at risk and in harm's way. So it doesn't necessarily only become wrong when it works out for the worst. Even when it works out for the best, the action that's taken on the in contrary to the evidence is wrong. So this then becomes there's a moral to this story that the author is trying to derive from the whole example. And now I'm going to put that moral or principle on the board. So what's the point of the ship owner example? Well, it's all to steer us towards this logical conclusion, he thinks, which is the conclusion that it is wrong always, everywhere, and for anyone to believe anything without sufficient evidence. So what Clifford is telling you is that when you really think about examples like this, you will appreciate that this is a true moral principle. That it's wrong, that it's unethical actually, always, not just sometimes, everywhere, not just some places, and for anyone, not just some people, to believe anything, not just some things, without sufficient evidence. So he's basically making a very bold kind of affirmative statement here that nobody should ever believe things without sufficient evidence. If they do, if they believe something, even though the evidence doesn't show that it's likely to be true, or even worse, they believe it even though it's contradicted by the evidence, when they do that, they're doing something wrong, and they shouldn't do that. That's bad. That's wrong. That's his argument. And he thinks that the ship owner example kind of drives home the point, but that it generalizes from that point to all other situations too. So it's not merely the type of case given by him, but it's any other situation too, where a person ends up believing something, but they don't have sufficient evidence to base that belief or to justify it. So when you form beliefs in the way that the ship owner did, like you just believe something because you hope it's true, but there's not good enough evidence behind it, he says you're doing something wrong. Now, there's a little terminology that he gives to give a label to the type of person that the ship owner is, and that term is credulous character. So let me put that information here. The credulous character. So this is a type of person who will believe things that are not based on or supported by sufficient evidence. Okay, so the word credulous is rooted in the word credibility or credence. So a credulous character, you can think of it as like a person who gives credibility to statements that they should not. They believe things that don't deserve to be believed just looking at the evidence that is available. So it's kind of almost sort of like the concept of a gullible type of person, a person who is willing to believe things that are not necessarily well-based in the evidence. He argues that to be a credulous character, like one example of that would be the ship owner, but sometimes any of us do this in our everyday lives, to be a credulous character is actually wrong, and it's not okay. And he thinks that the reason that it's wrong is because it does harm. But he claims that it does two types of harm. So next I'm going to put up here on the board, what are the two types of harms that he thinks comes from having this so-called credulous character. So two harms of the credulous character. Okay, so he basically says there is self-harm that comes from that, and there's also social harm that comes from that too. And let me explain the underlying reasons that he gave for why these two kinds of harm happen. So the self-harm part is that if you're a credulous character, and that's your intellectual habit, then you harm yourself because you make your own power of judgment very weak. So you become a poor judge of what is true and false. So poor judge of what is true and false. And makes you unable to face uncomfortable truths. So that's the self-harm part. When you are a credulous character, then you end up believing things that are not very well supported by evidence. But think about it though. Why do you believe a person would want to believe in something if there wasn't very good evidence to back it up? Well, it can't be because it's an unpleasant thing to believe. Otherwise, they would say, well, if the evidence shows it's not likely, I'll go with the evidence. But if it's a pleasing thing that's not supported by evidence, that's when people usually just choose to believe in it because it's comforting to them, right? So people seek comfort in suspect beliefs that are not grounded in evidence because it makes them feel like less fear or more, I don't know, self-assuredness about the scenario that they are in. But that's not good to you. It might feel good for the moment to feel like, well, I don't believe in this negative, troubling belief. But then you're not going to be able to take the proper actions to prepare for that possible outcome. Like, I don't know, think about a person who's given an evacuation order by the authorities and they say, all the evidence shows that your house is likely to be overtaken by flames if you remain inside, so you really should leave. And that's our order to you. And the person says, yeah, but my house burning down, that would be so horrible to lose my property. I just refuse to believe that could happen, even though that's what the evidence shows. And since I refuse to believe that, I'm going to just choose to believe that everything will work out and I'll be fine if I stay there. Now, you might feel good for the moment, like in your state of denial, because you're denying that bad things will happen and that might comfort you, but you're going to be much worse off if you end up having your house burned down because you didn't follow what the evidence implied. Maybe some people find, like, I don't know, socializing in big groups, not wearing a mask, it has risks, but I just don't think those risks will happen to me because who wants to think about getting sick with this terrible virus? So going into those situations full of the false comfort that comes from these poorly based beliefs is actually going to put you in harm's way and at greater risk. So you want to be the kind of person who can face reality for what it is, even when the evidence shows that something unfavorable is likely to be true. You'd rather be informed about that than to try and like bury your head in the sand or believe something to the contrary, because it won't do you any good when these false beliefs are exposed for what they are, and then you're in a worse off situation. So you do harm to your powers of judgment and your intellectual ability to face things that are not pleasant by being a credulous character. So he says it's not a good thing. And then the social harm just kind of piggybacks on that. The social harm is that to the extent that there are other people who are influenced by you, who maybe look up to you or who just like you, they're going to see your example, and then if you're a credulous character, they're going to adopt that same habit, and then they'll spread it on their own, and it starts to spread like a wildfire or like a disease. And before long, you've contributed to making a world in which people don't have respect for evidence and facts and just believe whatever they hope is true. And that's not the kind of world that you want to live in. I mean, imagine that you were accused of a crime that you didn't commit, and a member of the jury is like, do I really need to hear the arguments? I just feel like they're guilty, so I want to just say that. You'd rather that they weigh the evidence carefully. Or if you go into a doctor, you want the doctor to be able to look at the facts and give you a right diagnosis and not just say, let's hope for the best and assume that nothing's wrong. So it does social harm. And I'll put here the exact kind of specific way of putting that. You will influence others to have a credulous character also. You will influence people to also have a credulous character, which would spread it further. I mean, this COVID whole thing is like it's kind of in a weird way like a very appropriate background to say this whole essay, which I've taught for years, but now in this current climate, it's a little more relevant in a way, because you might say, well, if some people out there don't want to pay attention to scientific evidence and they just want to take all these risks and throw caution to the wind, that's just their business. They're going to be harmed. But if I am a wise, reasonable person who follows the protocols, I'm fine. But that's not really true, right? Because those people doing those things also pose a danger to others, since, if they become infected, of course, they pose a risk to any other party around them. So you can't really just contain the harm of a credulous character to the person who lives that way themselves. It's going to spill over and cause others to behave in the same way, and therefore we'll all be at an increased risk. So some have argued in reaction to Clifford, isn't it a little too strong, though, to say that everyone should always believe everything based on good evidence? Maybe just the really important things. Like the ship owner, okay, he's got life and death on the line if he forms a belief without good evidence. But if I just sit here and I want to believe that aliens exist in outer space and I don't have better evidence to prove it, who cares if I'm wrong? Nobody gets hurt if I'm wrong. Isn't that okay? Clifford is really strict on this, and he says, actually, no. Even if it seems inconsequential to you, like it's so innocent for me to have like this silly belief that I like prefer to have, he says that sets you up, though, to have this disposition, which might seem innocent enough in this case, but in the next scenario that comes forward, if you keep operating like that, it might have bigger stakes where there's more on the line. So he just doesn't think it's good to nurture or to foster this intellectual habit, but that we fall into it quite easily because there's a lot of things that we want to be true, and so we'll bypass evidence to believe in them. And then there's a lot of things that we don't want to be true, and we'll ignore evidence so that we don't have to believe those things. It's best to just follow the evidence to wherever it leads and allow yourself to be reasonable enough to try and see where the evidence does lead. Okay? Now, to the bigger picture of how could this be used against Pascal. Let's try and make those two pieces connect now. Pascal says that you ought to believe in God, but why? Does he say, because here's the proof. I'm going to prove to you that God exists. Does Pascal say we can prove God exists? What do you know about that? Did he say, we've got proof, and here's the proof? What was Pascal's view on the whole question of proving God exists? Can you remember that? Good, Parker. He said that we don't have proof. In fact, he said it can't be proven because God, if he does exist, he's way, way beyond our ability to even comprehend in our mind. So let's not try and go down the path of arguing that he exists or proving that he exists. Let's just try and show that if you believe in him and you're right, you're going to have a big win, and that's going to be to your advantage. So you should just choose to believe because you hope that the belief is correct, not because there's evidence to prove it's correct. But the thing is, according to Clifford now, that's not the right reason to believe anything. You're only supposed to believe so according to him and his argument. It would only be the right way to believe if there's good evidence to support the belief. Without that sufficient evidence, you should just say, I don't know. I can't tell. It's not something that the evidence makes clear. Got no evidence, but just go ahead and believe, because if you're right, that'll be to your benefit. It sounds like the ship owner who's saying, I have no evidence that this ship can actually make it home. In fact, to the contrary, I have evidence that it won't, but I'll believe that it will, and if I'm right, then that'll suit my self-interest. So basically, yeah, you can see him standing against the idea of forming a belief because of the hoped-for benefit of the belief turning out to be true. And that then can be used as a counter to Pascal's wager. He says then, yeah, on page 53, Clifford, he says, if a man holding a belief which he was taught in childhood keeps down and pushes away the doubts that arise about it in his mind, purposely avoids reading books and the company of people that call it into question, and regards as impious those questions, which cannot be asked without disturbing it, the life of that man is one long sin against mankind. So if you form beliefs and you refuse to consider doubts or evidence that those beliefs are false, if you just hold on to these cherished beliefs despite all contrary evidence, you're being a credulous character, and he would argue that that's not to your best interest, nor to the best interest of the society, the community that you live in. Now you say this, Chloe, if the ship owner was wrong, people got hurt, but if someone who believes in God is wrong, there's no loss other than personal finite loss. Well, yeah, Chloe, I know that, but remember the point that I just referred to where he says, even if it seems like it's a belief which does not bear any costs, you have this hopeful, wishful belief, but not based on better evidence. And you may say there's no significant costs to being wrong in this case, unlike the ship owner where if he's wrong, lives will be lost. But Chloe, the point he's making is that that way of forming beliefs won't be limited to the one case of the belief in God. It will also be used in all these other cases too, where people should follow the evidence, something puts people in harm's way. So what he thinks is that you won't be able to restrict the tendency to believe in the things that you hope are true to just the question of religion. You're going to keep doing that. So you're going to be like, the doctor says that I've got to get chemotherapy because I have a cancer, but that would be terrible, and I don't want to believe that. So I'm going to keep seeking an alternative diagnosis because I hope that that's wrong. Meanwhile, the disease is getting worse, and you're not taking the proper treatment to mitigate against the worst case scenario. So he's not saying that it's necessarily going to harm people if you're wrong about the belief in God itself, but that mode of forming beliefs without better evidence will continue to pop up in all these other ways, in all these other cases. And in general, he thinks it's going to tend towards harm, and it's going to be to everyone's disadvantage over time. Does that kind of make sense, Chloe? I'm not trying to say you're wrong at all. I'm just trying to give you the sense of like what Clifford might be thinking on this point, right? That you don't necessarily lose in that case individually, But by supporting the whole habit of forming beliefs without better evidence, just because you want them to be true, you'll keep doing that across the board. Yeah? Okay, good. Yeah, it's the overall mindset and what it could lead to. And he doesn't think it's innocent, basically, in any one case, even when the stakes are low, because it will come back later when the stakes are higher, and then it'll show its true potential to harm. Okay, so good question. I like that contribution for sure. Okay, so that's about it for the Clifford. Now I'm going to go ahead and move into the next author. We'll just try to keep going quick so I could at least get one more piece in for us today. And this is also another author that could be used or thought of as a type of criticism of Pascal's wager. Okay, so now we're looking at the writing of Robert McKim. Robert McKim, this is from 2001, and his paper is called The Hiddenness of God. Robert McKim, The Hiddenness of God, 2001. And Stephen, let me see here. If it is incredulous to believe anything without evidence, then what evidence is there that all incredulous beliefs are harmful? Well, I think it is because the motivation for believing a belief that is not well based on evidence is the desire that it be true. But since the world in general doesn't revolve around what a person's individual desires are, it's likely that many of those beliefs will be false. You know, wishful thinking and hope is something that probably is a good thing, but it shouldn't necessarily be that your beliefs are governed by mere hope and wishful thinking and is unresponsive to evidence. I guess all I could do is point you to the type of examples where, by not following the evidence, you've exposed yourself to greater risks. And the person who does so freely and willingly on the presumption of their comforting but poorly justified belief. Now, you say all incredulous beliefs are harmful. He doesn't necessarily claim that they're all harmful on an individual level, but that the tendency that they instill within you is bound to be harmful in the long range of time. And I guess all I could say is that there's some intuition behind that, because when you think about people who refuse to obey an evacuation order, who won't, let's say, take vaccines even though there's scientific evidence that they're effective, you know, who won't adhere to public health guidance because they defy the evidence because it makes them uncomfortable. You know, we can see examples like that in real life where people are doing harm to themselves and to others by not following evidence. So I guess he would just say that that's going to be the general case. And then I see your comment here. It leads to things like the people who say God will protect them when they don't wear a mask. Yeah, I mean, that's just one possible example. But of course, this is written way before the whole coronavirus thing. So he's just talking about any situation in which you comfort yourself with an unjustified belief, but you're probably going to just be taking a worse risk and taking on greater liability to harm by doing that. I mean, that's the best I think I could say on his behalf, you know? So to the Robert McKim, everyone, is that all right? Robert McKim, The Hiddenness of God. So this is a still current day philosopher. He's like 67 years old now. He's a professor over in University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. And he worked in philosophy of religion, ethics, and history of philosophy. So this paper, The Hiddenness of God, it basically makes the case that if there is a God, the fact that he's hidden is problematic. So hidden, meaning like me and you, well, at least me, for example, you're looking at me and you don't have any doubt right now that I exist because you can see me broadcasting this video to you live. So you don't have to like go off of faith that I exist. You could just sort of see it visually. You can use your five senses, in this case vision, to verify it, and it's straightforward and there's no denying it. But God, well, maybe it's all a simulation, right? But let's just set aside those thoughts. We'll get back to the whole the world is a dream concept later in the semester. But yeah, setting that aside for the moment anyway, we have the five senses that give us clear evidence that other beings exist. But with God, it's different because God is not perceptible in the ordinary way. Like you can't just say, hey, look to your right. Don't you see he's floating right there? Or
I can smell God right now, or that I can, sense him with any of the sight, taste, touch, hearing, or smell. So since he's hidden, that produces doubts that some have about whether he exists, right? Seeing is believing. If he wasn't hidden, there'd be no question whether he exists. But because he's hidden, it does at least cause some people to have their doubts. Now, that's the big picture. That's kind of like a preview of the article. Now I'm going to try and walk you through some of his specific examples. Now, as yet again in philosophy, we see a case here where the author chooses to go with a hypothetical scenario to present the overall argument. And this hypothetical scenario is highly elaborate, kind of almost like a storybook vibe. So the best way for me to talk you through it will be, again, kind of like with Clifford's ship owner, to just give you the narrative, and I'll step in with some notes once I finish that. So here's the setup for our little scenario. Imagine that once upon a time there was this island, okay? And this island is an island where there's a community of inhabitants. Basically a population of human beings live there, a little civilization on the island. And from the perspective of the people who live there on the island, this island has always been totally isolated from any outside contact. In fact, so much so that the people who live there, as far as they know, maybe the island is the whole human race. As far as they know, maybe there's no such thing as other parts of the world where humans live, because no one on the island has ever ventured out to make contact. And as far as back as anybody can remember, nobody from outside the island has come there to make a visit. So first thing I'm saying about the situation, hopefully, is pretty straightforward. There's an island, there's people that live there. For all they know, that's the whole human race. Such is their isolation from the outside. But there are these legends and rumors and myths that some of the older folks on the island tell. And if you go to some of these elders, not all of them, but some of them will tell you this. They'll say, according to the legends of old, way back in the day, long before the current time, this island, which we think of today as being this isolated, domain of humans, was actually part of a bigger empire. And it was just one little part of this kind of constellation of lands, but it was a part of a bigger empire. So they say it wasn't always like this. Back in the day, a long time ago, this island was part of something bigger, part of a bigger group of lands that formed together an empire. And there's a second part to these legends. They also said that way back then, there was this emperor who ruled over the whole empire, and he was great and good and majestic. But those are some rumors, and young people and others, they don't know exactly whether these are true or whether they're just like cultural superstitions and myths, but they're out there, okay? Now, one day, something really unusual for the people on the island happens. There's like a group of people, let's say, on the shore, and what they look at and they see in the distance is actually, whoa, there's some ships that are coming into the island. So actually, this is huge and unprecedented for their entire recent memory, because there's never been those visitors, like I said. So now they're witnessing ships that are coming in, rolling towards the shore with some passengers on the ships. So that gets their attention, and a little crowd forms over on the beach. They're awaiting the arrival of these visitors from the water. So the ships pull up, they throw down the anchor, and down come some people off of the ship. And since there's a little crowd there, they address themselves to those crowd. So imagine this interaction. One of the guys from the ship says, "Hello, everybody. Okay, I'm glad we actually have a crowd here because we've come to send a message to you guys. We've actually been sent to deliver this specific message. So we know you guys have heard some rumors and myths, right? You've heard from your elders that this used to be part of a big empire, this island. And we've come to deliver you a message that's true. That's not just a myth or a fable, but it's a fact. It's really true. This is part of a bigger empire. It's just that you guys have been so kind of have lost your sense of connection to it. Sorry. You've kind of lost your sense of connection to it, but it's true. This is part of a much bigger empire, and we've actually come to try and get you guys to understand and recognize that. The other thing is, we also know that you guys have heard that there's this emperor, this great and good emperor, and that's also true. So we're his messengers. He sent us to you actually to deliver these words. He said, I want you guys to go over to the island and reclaim the island for the empire, and I want you to tell all the people there that I would like them to declare that they're loyal to me and to give their allegiance to me, because I'm their emperor, and I want to get this back on track and get them back in the fold of the empire, okay? So they say that to the group, but then there's this extra thing that is added. This is a little twist. So the guy from the ship says, there's one more thing though, okay, everyone, about the emperor that I want to mention. It's very important. So we call him the hidden emperor. Now, wheels are turning in your head there, hearing me lecture. Why do you think that they are calling this guy the hidden emperor? What could be the reason for that? What do you think? What do you judge is going to be the reason for that in this scenario? So we call him the hidden emperor, and I'm going to tell you why. Why? Yeah, no one has ever seen him exactly. And that's what they say to the group. They say, yeah, so about the emperor that we just spoke of, he's called the hidden emperor, and the reason is because he's hidden. He does not ever let himself be viewed or perceived with any of the five senses. So none of us have ever seen or heard or touched this person, but we know he exists, we believe he exists, and we know that he has these awesome powers. Like he can be invisible, he can read people's minds, he can be in more than one place at once. Anyway, that's the hidden emperor. He's awesome and almost supernatural. But back to our question, because we really got to get an answer. What will it be, everybody? Are you gonna tell us that you're loyal to the emperor and that you are pledging allegiance to the emperor, or not? Because we have to get your answer. So that's why we're here. So okay, they say that to the crowd, right? And the crowd is standing there, and there's like a buzz going through the crowd as they discuss this amongst themselves. And one guy steps forward and wants to speak to everybody. So he's coming out of the crowd of the islanders. And in the book, in the essay, he's just described as a bearded man. So I don't know. I'm not the greatest at creating, artwork like this, but there you go. This is our bearded guy. Why is he bearded? I don't know. Is that just philosophy people or somehow beard-like? But whatever. Okay, so here's the bearded guy. He comes forward and he says, okay, everybody, my fellow islanders, I want to talk because I have some things to say about these guys from the ship. Now, they basically, I was on board with everything they said right up till they got to that part at the end about the hidden stuff. And that's where you guys lost me. So what are you talking about that he's hidden? That's strange. I'm not hidden. You guys, all of us, we're not hidden. And it's just not sort of normal to think that there's a being that's hidden. If there is this emperor that's hidden, and you're saying he wants us to believe in him, right? If he wants us to believe in him, wouldn't the most easy way and most obvious way to do that would be simply if he did what? What do you guys think? What is the point of our bearded friend here? He says, if he really wanted us to believe that he existed, like you say, then obviously wouldn't he just show himself? Correct, Parker. So that's what the bearded guy says. He's saying, I have no problem saying that I believe in him or that I want to be his subject, but it would be much better if he could just reveal himself, and then we won't have all these doubts and skepticism. It's kind of strange. If he wants us to believe in him, this is a weird way to go about it. Wouldn't he just show himself, and then there's just no question and there's no denying it? As it is, you're saying he wants us to believe in him, but he also refuses to do anything to make it self-evident. If it's so important for him to be hidden all the time, why would he even want you to tell us that he exists? So something's not adding up here. The bearded guy's got his doubts. But another person steps forward from the crowd who's of a different opinion. And this is just described as a woman from the crowd, so here she is. Now here's what she says as she steps forward. She says, but hold on though. To my bearded friend over here, fellow islander, I just have a difference of opinion. You say that there's no reason for this emperor to be hidden if he wants us to believe that he exists. But I kind of think there could be a reason behind it. Like, there's a fair, perhaps rational reason for him to want to be hidden like that. Maybe because if he's hidden, it allows us to maybe what? What do you think is her point? Like, she's basically saying, no, I kind of see the reason or point here. He wants to maybe be hidden because if he's hidden, then that will give us the ability or choice or what? What do you think is the end of that statement from the woman here? I think there could be a viable, legitimate reason that he's hidden. Because when he's hidden, that allows what with us? What do you think? Think it over and just give me something. Even if it's a, random just stab in the dark. What do you think could be this legitimate basis that he's hidden, according to the woman's intuition? Maybe it's simply because he wants to allow what? I'll give you a second here. What do you think? Okay, Parker, then, like, if you take a guess and believe him, you get more of a benefit because you took a risk. Kind of. Let me kind of elaborate on the thinking I think you're trying to state here. And, like, people have their own option. Good, right. That's right on the money of what the author's character says. So she says, if he's hidden, then he's giving us a choice, isn't he? whether we want to believe in him. He's not just making it so obvious by like revealing himself. In that case, seeing is believing, and we would not be able to deny that he exists. But maybe it's important to him that we kind of take a little leap of faith. He's sort of testing our loyalty to him. He wants to see, will you believe in something that you can't really see? And if so, that will be a more vivid demonstration of your loyalty to me. So maybe he wants to give us that choice, that option, whether to believe in him, instead of it just being foisted upon us as something undeniable. Maybe it's important to him to see us make that little leap of faith. And then she also suggests this. Maybe it also kind of sets up like a hierarchy among us, such that he's above us because he's hidden and we're not. Maybe that can kind of enhance his authority and power relative to us. So I actually think there could be some reasonable, fair reasons for him to be hidden like that. And that's her view. But then after that, a third guy steps forward, and this, nope, sorry, Peachy, she's about to walk on the keyboard. I got to put her in another room. Sorry, Peachy, don't do that. Okay, my bad. And the third guy's a cat, yeah, just Peach. No, the third person steps forward, and the third person represents like a moderate in the middle, kind of trying to split the difference between the other two. So this moderate guy in the middle basically says, okay, look, let me kind of try and break this up and tell you each where you made some good points. So on your side, this guy said there's no evidence that the emperor exists, and so we shouldn't believe in him, right? Well, it's not exactly true that there's no evidence. Maybe there's no like visual evidence, but there's still something that gives us a reason to think he exists. And it's just the basic fact that what? What do you think is the evidence that the moderate middle guy claims to exist for the emperor's existence? What is the evidence, if anything? The people that are saying he exists, right, Parker? So he says, look, we've got the stories from our elders. That's testimony. And we've also got the missionaries coming in off the boat that say he exists. So we haven't seen him or whatever, but people are providing us their testimony that he exists. So that's not nothing. It's maybe not the strongest possible evidence, but it's not nothing either. So on your behalf, there's some reason to think there's an emperor. But you also made a good point too. When you said that it's strange for him to be hidden if he wants us to believe that he exists, I felt that. I kind of think that makes sense. So I would say this, kind of, here's my middle ground position. The emperor's either not existing, and that's why it seems like he's hidden. So it could just be that he doesn't exist. Or it could be that he does exist, but because he does remain hidden, maybe he just doesn't care at all about whether or not we what. So that's his suggestion. Maybe the emperor doesn't exist, or if he does, the fact that he keeps staying hidden might just mean that he doesn't even care in the first place whether we believe in him, right, Parker? Because as he's reasoning, if he really cared whether we believed in him, and that mattered so much to him, then he wouldn't make it that difficult for us to believe in him, and he'd want it to be easy for us. So, you know, take your pick. Either there's no emperor, and there's no such thing as a hidden one, or there is a hidden emperor, but his hiddenness means we could believe whatever we want, and he doesn't really care. So these three individuals in this scenario are obviously like stand-ins for three positions or perspectives that people can have on the topic of God, because this is really all obviously like a metaphor for the situation of whether you're going to believe in God, given the fact that God is hidden in some sense. So this bearded guy represents a skeptic, the person who says, they say God exists, but I can't see any evidence myself, therefore I don't believe. And this is like a believer, a person who says, I've got faith in things that I can't necessarily prove. You don't have visual evidence of that. And this guy is known as a tentative believer, according to Wu-Chen. It's the person who's sort of straddling the divide between the other two, hedging their bets, saying like, maybe there is such a thing, or maybe not. But if there is, then the hiddenness causes me to wonder if the being even thinks or cares about whether we exist. Now, Parker, you say, how would the guy who came to the island know the emperor said that if they said they never interacted with him? Telepathic communication. He received divine, or I don't know, in this case not necessarily divine, but he received imperial revelation coming straight to his brain from the hidden emperor, or that's what he presumes to be the case. Is it actually just a delusion? Is it due to some other natural factor and not the supernatural nature of the emperor? Perhaps, but that's the question. That's the question for the subjects on the island, to believe or not to believe. Now, the missionaries clearly believe, but the people on the island are split in different ways. Some are skeptics, some are choosing to believe, and some are thinking, well, the hiddenness is weird, and maybe he doesn't exist, or maybe he does, but unlike what everyone's claiming, he doesn't necessarily care about whether we believe in him. No, they're not going to go to war, Tristan. That, well, maybe in that possible world being described, that could sound like a way it plays out, but we don't get that little extra detail. Anyway, though, so Robert McKim, the author of the essay, he sides with the tentative believer on the real question of God. So what he says is God being hidden could be one of two reasons. Number one, it could just be that there's actually no such thing, and that would mean that there's not actually a hidden being, but there's no such being. Or there could be God, but because he stays hidden, McKim proposes the possibility that maybe he doesn't necessarily care whether we believe in him. Now, I want to make a connection with the last minute or so here between that idea and Pascal's wager. Now, in Pascal's wager, there's the assumption built right into the whole argument that God definitely cares whether you believe in him or not. Because in Pascal's wager, remember, what has God claimed to do if a person believes in him and he does exist and he's real? Well, the claim is that he would reward you with heaven, paradise, right, to infinity. And it's also said that God cares so much about whether you believe that in case he exists and you don't believe, he'll either punish you with hell or deny you the reward of heaven. But if McKim's idea was correct and God existed but didn't even care whether we believed in him or not, right, then that would undermine the wager, because it would mean that the stakes and risks no longer exist. If God doesn't necessarily care whether you believe or not, then you can imagine this scenario on Judgment Day. A believer goes to heaven and God is like, well, I don't care whether you believe or not. Let's look at your moral record and the nature of how you acted. Or a non-believer is there on Judgment Day and God's like, it doesn't bother me that you don't believe. I really don't care whether people believe or not. I just look at the nature of whether they lived as a good person or not. So if we eliminate the assumption that God cares about whether you believe in him or not, the Pascal's wager doesn't work. Pascal's wager is supposed to induce within you fear of disbelief and hope if you do believe, because the claim is that God attaches value to belief and disvalue to non-belief. But if God, remaining hidden, is just up in the clouds, not caring about what religion we practice or even whether we believe in the first place, then the Pascal's wager would not have any stakes to enforce these judgment of risks and rewards. Okay? Now, that is how it could be used as a pushback to Pascal's wager, because again, the wager claims you should believe in God when you appreciate the stakes that are involved, depending on whether you believe or not, and depending on whether God exists or not. According to McKim, God is hidden, so maybe there's no such thing, or even if there is, the hiddenness indicates that he might not be taking the biggest interest, or it might not be on the top of his mind what we think about him or whether we believe he exists or not. There's just one or two more things to say at the tail end of this, but that's the major core message of McKim's essay. So if you choose to write on prompt 1, now you have a pair of critics to use as possible objections. There's only one last author then on the whole philosophy of religion material. That's Nicholas Everett, and that's the article called Theism in Modern Science. So I'd like you guys to go ahead and read that over the weekend, and then read the work of John Stuart Mill. That's Utilitarianism. I think I'm going to have to delete one essay off of the class list just because the time that we've given to good class discussions and lectures has maybe taken over enough for one additional meeting. So I'm going to have to strike off, I think, the JJC Smart article that follows after Mill. But I'll tell you about that in an announcement. For now, anyway, the next 2 readings are according to the schedule, at least in the order of dates. So go and read the Nicholas Everett, finish the McKim if you have not already, and then after that we're done with religion and we start talking about ethics, and the first new author will be John Stuart Mill. Okay, so I guess I'll let you guys go. We've gone just a minute over time. Sorry for that, but appreciate all you guys' attendance, study, and hard work during a tricky semester that we're all dealing with, but seems like we're doing well. So thanks again. I have office hours from 11 to 12, as always, every Friday. You may or may not come. It's up to you, but maybe next week some will attend, trying to get a little last help on their essays or whatever. But for now, yeah, have a great weekend. I'll see you guys next time. And until then, take care. Okay, bye-bye.